Welcome to the Lexington Public Library's Tales from the Kentucky Room podcast, where we discuss everything Lexington and Fayette County history. I'm Mariam, and in each episode of this podcast, we will feature a guest that will share a piece of local history. So thank you for tuning in and enjoy. The National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution is a lineage society and service organization founded in 1890. Its members are descended from those who participated in the American Revolutionary War. This organization's mission is one of civil service and historic preservation and currently boasts approximately 3,000 chapters around the U.S. and other countries. The Kentucky State Society itself was behind the erection of Bryan's Station Spring Monument, commemorating the action of Mary Polly Hawkins Craig, where in 1782 she led a group of the settlement's women down to the spring to gather water and create a diversion against a siege by Native Americans and their British allies. The contemporary DAR has grown in number and adapted to an ever-changing societal landscape. Public perception of the organization is that of exclusivity and marginalization, which is understandable in the wake of some of the historic discriminatory decisions taken by a few of its chapters, most notably in 1980 when Lena Santos Ferguson was denied membership due to her race. However, today the director of the DAR, Pamela Rouse Wright, has been actively taking steps to change those perceptions, including starting a scholarship named for Lena Ferguson to benefit students at the University of the District of Columbia. Wright commissioned a memorial plaque in honor of Lena Ferguson that was placed in the Memorial Garden at DAR Constitution Hall. In addition to breaking down the barrier of admission to African Americans, the organization has recently updated its bylaws to allow trans women to join the organization. Here in Lexington, the DAR chapter is one of the more active in the country. As the oldest chapter in the state of Kentucky, they have initiated and participated in many community service events. With us today on the podcast, we have three of its members. Judy Owens, a local lawyer, journalist, and writer that is currently serving as a regent of the Lexington chapter of the DAR. We also have with us Robin Fisher, a native of Owensboro, Kentucky, currently serving as chapter librarian and conservation committee chair, leading the chapter members in volunteer service at McConnell Springs. And we are also happy to have Sharon Withers, a native of Whately County, Kentucky, and active member of the DAR since 1985. Sharon has authored 2 books of transcribed records and served the National Society DAR Registrar General from 2013 to 2016. During the term, the Y-DNA policy went into effect in support of new member applications and supplemental applications. She is also a member of the Heinemann Settlement School Advisory Board. All right, welcome all to the podcast. We've got Judy and Sharon and Robin with us today to talk about the Daughters of the American Revolution. Welcome, Judy. To get started, give us a little bit of background about what the DAR is and what the mission of the organization.
Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity, and especially to the public libraries. We love the libraries, and we're very grateful to have the opportunity. So, yes, I'm a 27-year member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. We're a women's service organization. We started in 1890. We operate on a chapter or local system and then a state and national organization. Fayette County has 5 chapters, so we invite people, if they're interested in DAR, to check out all the chapters. Go ahead and visit because they're all the same mission, but their personalities are different. Some of them do different activities. So we have 5 chapters. We're really blessed.
Wow, that's incredible.
Lexington chapter is the oldest in Kentucky. We were formed in 1891. Our organizing regent was Elizabeth Kincaid Shelby. And so if you're a Lexington history fan, those 2 last names are going to be extremely familiar. And in addition to that, we're the home community of Mary DeShay. Mary was one of the 4 founding members of the DAR on the national level, and she's buried over at the beautiful Lexington Cemetery in a very beautiful marker that we commemorate because of her leadership. So the modern DAR is a women's service organization. There's about 190,000 of us nationwide. We like to say we're not your grandmother's DAR. Not that we don't love our grandmothers, but I think there's a little bit of a stereotype about the DAR that we are white gloves and teapots,
Yes.
and that's not exactly what we do anymore. You'll certainly see pictures of that if you look in archives, but that's not our routine anymore. We do active service projects. Because we're a pretty old organization, we've accumulated a lot of committees. So there's over 50 committees at the national level, but nobody does 50 committees. Most chapters pick 2 or 3 topics that their members are interested in, and that's what we work with. Now, I have to say, when I joined the DAR, I was a bit of an outlier. I really didn't.
Tell us more.
I didn't really care much about American history one way or the other. I wouldn't describe myself as particularly patriotic. And I had the perception that a lot of people have that this is a politically conservative organization. And I am a flaming liberal Democrat. So I didn't know if I'd find a home in the DAR or not. The reason I joined is I was married and we lived in my husband's hometown and for about 10 years, and then we ended up divorcing. I moved to Perry County in Hazard, where I had not cultivated a lot of friends, and I didn't have any family there. And I was working, and some of my coworkers, I think, became concerned. I was really depressed. I was kind of at a loss. I was sort of felt hollowed out and lonesome. And one of the ladies said, you need to get out a little bit more. And how about going to a DAR meeting? And I said, okay, but I had
Sure.
I had zero intention of actually showing up at this meeting. And she knew it. She was older than me, probably 15, 20 years older than me. And she said, why don't I just come by and pick you up?
Wow.
Yeah. So we went to a log cabin over in Leslie County that one of the members had restored. And it was a transformative experience for me because these women were older. Many of them were widowed. It's Perry County, Kentucky. A lot of the children had moved to cities where there was more prosperity. So they were a lot like me. They had no children. They had no husband. They weren't sitting around feeling sorry for themselves. They weren't sitting around listening to Hank Williams records 24/7 and crying all the time. They were proud of themselves. They dressed like they were proud of themselves. They conducted meetings like they were proud of themselves. And not only that, I think they thought of a broader sense of what a family can be, that it isn't just your parents and your husband and your children, that it took a lot of people to get you here. And who were your grandparents and who were their parents and what historical events were going on when they were living that shaped their lives and then shaped your life. So I found that and I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing about my family history. As a matter of fact, I became a running joke in our chapter because when they walked up to me and said, do you know if you have a Revolutionary War ancestor? I was being very depressed and sad. And so I said, I don't think I would have a Revolutionary War ancestor. This became a joke. They would walk up and say that to me all the time because obviously I didn't have a problem finding one. And since then, I've proven 13 more. So the thing that's fascinated me was that these women gave me a role model for how you can live a second stage of your life as a mature woman with dignity, with purpose, with friendship, with fellowship, with meaning. And that's what they gave me. And they put me back together when I had fallen apart. So I have been very loyal to them. And I have had friends, obviously, I have a lot of liberal friends, but, and they've said to me, why do you want to be a part of an organization with so many conservatives? And I said, first of all, you're making an assumption about what their politics are. We're not a political organization. Second of all, it's kind of an oasis of a place where you don't talk about politics. And the third thing is I've gained a lot of confidence in my ability to deal with people who are different from me. And what I have found is that I love my Republican women. They are organized, they're smart, they're energetic, they're committed. I mean, we may have a philosophical difference about our political orientation, but I work well with them. And I think there's that one aspect of our lives that are different, but there are many aspects that are the same. And I apply those principles to other people I meet who I might have assumptions about.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like the sort of this dichotomy of the political landscape that we're in right now, I think feeds into that narrative. It seems like there's a sisterhood there that kind of transcends all of that. It's been there for decades. And I think that strength probably is what contributes to the continued success and the ability for it to attract people of different backgrounds. So the organization itself has grown, as you've mentioned, and it's adapted in many ways over the years. How important is that in order for it to remain a vital connection to the history, whether it's, glorified history or not so glorified?
Well, one of the things I would mention is that we have a statewide program for reading. So there's a reading list, and it's a little friendly competition about whether you can read 30 books about the Revolutionary period or about women. And I think what we find in there is that you might think, well, the DAR, I bet they've picked out 20 books where it's all flag waving and it's all loving their presidents and all that. It isn't. One of the things that we read on the last reading list was called The Last King of America, which is about King George. And it's really kind of funny. Our DAR ladies, after they read about King George, yes, our founding fathers called him a tyrant, but he actually wasn't a tyrant. And one of the things that they loved about him is he's such a good husband. That all the other kings had concubines that they had to pay, that the taxpayers had to pay for. Not King George. He was very faithful to his wife. He had a whole bunch of kids. He loved his kids. He loved dressing up like a peasant and going out and talking to people about what they thought about the king. There's a lot of hilarious stories he collected from doing that. So, we try to challenge ourselves in our reading about what we assume about the founding of our country and what it was really like. And so that's one of the things that, Robin does. She's our chapter librarian. And not only has she done a great job of encouraging people to read off the reading list so that we get points and we win prizes, but she also has a broader vision, which is teaching our members how to use the library, and especially the contemporary library. And then one of our other big projects that we work on is genealogy. We consider ourselves a chapter that has a lot of expertise in that area. So we are so blessed to have Sharon Withers, who's a national expert and a pioneer in the area of using DNA to fill a lot of the gaps, because as everyone knows, people who are disenfranchised, whether they're women who are patriots, whether they're African American people who are patriots, Hispanic people who are patriots, those kind of people often do not have documentary evidence of what they've done.
Yes.
If you were a valet to a white person as an enslaved person, you may have had tremendous service that was never documented. And so that systematic leaving out of certain kinds of people is something that we're having to combat, because we insist on an accurate history, an accurate genealogy, and an accurate historical rendering. And it takes digging. If there has been a deliberate, purposeful removal of certain people from public record, we're going to have to do some work to restore that.
It takes a lot of more work. So you had me at reading lists. And that's how I met Robin, through her. She contacted the library and asked us to have the books that are on your list. So Robin, how did you come up with the reading lists for the DAR, or the local chapter at least?
Well, actually, we have a state organization, and it's our state librarian that curates the reading list, and she is a librarian by profession, so we're very blessed to have her in that role. But the reading program, each year she comes up with 30 books, and there's usually a mix between fiction and nonfiction. Some will be focused on women's issues or conservation, things related to DAR work. Now, some of it obviously is history. But she tries to pick books that people will not only learn from, but enjoy reading, because her goal, I think, has been to increase the number of people in the program, and she more than doubled it in her first year. So she's been very successful. We've had members in the past that have purchased some of the books, but I could foresee a time when they would not be available to do that. And of course, books are becoming more expensive. So I created a resource guide. So I have a listing of It includes Lexington's library as well as Woodford County and Scott County in terms of which books they have and in what formats. So if people need large print or if they prefer audio, they can look at the list and see what's available.
Yeah, and it's a really good list. I have a confession to make, Judy, about having a misconception about the different books that you guys would read. When I got an email from Judy, I was like, oh my gosh, what is this list going to look like? So I opened it, I'm like, ooh, I want to read that. Yeah. So it is a really good list, and we'll have it available. We'll put a link up on the page of this WAP.
Yeah, we'd love to share that. And I'm just grateful. I happened to talk with Heather Pritchard at my branch, Tate's Creek, and she said, well, you should send that list, and we'll see if we can't order additional books. So we're very appreciative to you all for getting more copies, because obviously we've got a lot of members.
Yes,
we hope
the list is increasing.
Are reading them.
Yes.
So that's great. We appreciate the support.
Good. And talk to us a little bit more about your involvement with the local chapter and what different projects you're working on.
Well, and I wear 2 hats right now. The second one is I'm chair of the Conservation Committee, and our primary work is at McConnell Springs. That was initiated by Clara Wilson. She's our former regent, but we've continued that. We love going to the park, and it's really twofold for us because it's not only conservation, but it's historic preservation as well, because that's, as you know, where Lexington was founded. So there's two key parts of our mission that we serve by volunteering there. The volunteer session, it's open every 4th Saturday of the month at 10 a.m. for anyone that wants to come. So the park always appreciates the help, and we've done a variety of tasks. Sometimes we remove invasive species, we clean the trails, or we may do other types of projects. We've prepared marketing materials for them, done what they call winter sowing. So we've prepared plant seedlings for planting the next spring. So it's really interesting. And of course, in a roundabout way, we're also supporting education. The park staff does the educational programs, but we participate in terms of preparing the park for visitors. And then also we support the Jack-o'-lantern Trail every year in October, and that's a moneymaker for the
always
park.
A fun event.
That helps to, we have a display every year. We have a ball putting it together. But the proceeds from that support programs at the park. So that's another way that we support their efforts there.
Yeah. How did you become involved with the DAR? What was your journey like?
Well, as I was growing up, I don't know what a lot of my friends were reading, but they never seemed to be the books that interested me. I liked biographies. I liked history. I liked books I felt like were teaching me something. And I knew I had a great aunt that had been in the DAR, but none of the other women in my family had pursued it. And I thought about it after college, and I realized I didn't really have the time and probably the extra money, because there is some initiation fees and things like that. But as I reached into my 40s, I kind of revisited that, and I thought, you love history. It's hard to find other people interested in history, so why not pursue the DAR? So, I have found a wonderful fit, because it's only about the historic preservation and education in terms of history, but a big part of that history is our military history. And I don't understand all the strategies with the battles. I can get lost in that, but I can understand, family experiences. I've had some family members in the military, and it's wonderful that a lot of the work we do, it supports the people that are basically boots on the ground. And I think that means a lot to them and to their families, and to recognize their service to our country and the way they protect us and maintain our freedom.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Sharon, so you are heavily involved with DNA analysis and the whole project to bringing in the accepting of DNA evidence in order to cement somebody's membership into the DAR. Talk to us a little bit about the Y-DNA and how that became as part of the, membership process.
Yes, I'd be glad to talk about that. I grew up on our family farm, the 7th generation. And so my grandmother was there on the farm with us. And so from the time I was tiny, I was steeped in the history of my ancestors. I knew their names, and she made them real people to me. And she, my grandmother told the unvarnished truth, even to the point there was splinters, because she did not make people saints. And I realized after I left home and came to central Kentucky from the mountains that was not true for everyone. And I was so moved by 2 quotes. One was from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said that every man is a quotation from all of his ancestors. So to me, that means we are the living word of our ancestors. That's how they live on through us. And I think that's very meaningful. And then Alex Haley said in talking about roots that whether we know it or not, in every one of us, there is a marrow deep yearning to know from where we came. And DNA opens a door for people who cannot fulfill that yearning in the traditional way by paper research. It opens a door for people who are adopted, for women who are adopted, but cannot access their original birth certificates or their adoption paperwork. It opens the door for people who have what we call a misattributed paternity, when they find out the man they thought was their biological father was in fact not. And it opens the door for people whose records were never recorded or destroyed. And DNA direct-to-consumer testing is a new science. The first company that came out with the DNA testing to consumers was Family Tree DNA in 2001. That's how new the science is. And so I had the blessing of becoming the Registrar General, who is the national officer that oversees the genealogy department, in 2013. And I really thought that it was criminal to have this tool that could open doors to eligible women and not use it. That was wrong. So we instituted the Y-DNA policy in 2014, and then we added autosomal DNA, which has been even a bigger game changer than the Y-DNA in 2020.
What is the autosomal?
Y-DNA traces a direct male line, so its utility is limited. Autosomal DNA measures DNA from all of our ancestors. So it's a much broader picture of your ancestry.
Interesting.
So that has been a game changer for us. Our very first Y-DNA case, I believe, was in 2015. And it was for a African-American woman who descended from a man who was born enslaved. And his father was the enslaver and his mother was enslaved. And the enslaver traced back to a patriot. And so Y-DNA was used to prove that relationship between the enslaved child and the enslaver father.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
It
So
is.
on that note, so African American women as members is growing in the organization.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
How has that genealogy research broke down the barriers for African American women to be able to join the organization?
I think there are a number of ways. I think that when the organization began what they call the Forgotten Patriots Project to recognize patriots of color.
Yeah.
Hispanic patriots, Black patriots, Native American patriots. To me, that was a sign that we were expanding because these patriots would have descendants. We would welcome into the membership. I think, that was key. I think that we began to focus we have what we call the Genealogical Records Committee, which actually looks for records that have maybe never been transcribed or digitized. And a lot of focus went on looking for records for marginalized people. They do exist, not in a great volume.
They haven't
and
been
not
collected as, like
right.
other.
They're not accessible, but they can be found. Right now, we're participating in the Million Name Project. If you're familiar with that project,
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. I read about that briefly as I was preparing for this podcast, but yeah, give us a little more detail about that.
That project is to take records of the enslaved, however they may be found, give them a name, trace their descendants forward, but also try to trace their descent backwards. And one key to that is DNA. So we're excited about partnering with that project.
Yeah. So what advice would you give, an example, like an African-American woman that is just embarking on doing research on her ancestry? If they've hit a wall, it's probably the most difficult research to find answers for.
It is. I would first of all advise her to consider taking a DNA test. And I would recommend that she take that test from Ancestry because they have the largest DNA database. They have 25 million testers in there. And DNA is all about matches. This is one time where you want to play with matches, right? Because you're comparing your DNA with other people, seeing where you match and where you might have a common ancestor. So I advise that. And then in the DAR, we have specialists in African American research, and they are so good at knowing the very obscure sources and are so willing to help. I mean, they have been wonderful. A lot of those specialists will work with an African-American woman first, and when we can see that we've hit roadblocks, then often that case will be sent to me so that we can start looking at DNA.
Yeah, because the DNA is just like it's a crack in the door, to the research.
Well, DNA doesn't lie.
Yeah.
It doesn't know that some things are to be kept secret. It doesn't know about the skeletons in the closet. It's brutally honest. And I always tell people, if you do take a DNA test, be ready to find a secret. Yeah. That, something was not quite what you thought it was. So it can validate your paper research, or it can throw a wrench in it, especially when you learn that the biological father in a generation wasn't who you assumed it was.
Yeah. Wow. What a finding that would be.
It would. We have had members who have discovered errors in their own lineage and are using DNA. I mean, it's a shock at first, and you go through a process of grieving and then acceptance. Many of them connect with their newfound families and relatives in a very beautiful way. And then they go about the work of tracing that biological line, sometimes finding new patriots in the process.
Wow. So you are doing a program for the library in June. Talk to us a little bit more about what the program is going to be and when and where, if our listeners are interested.
Yes, it is June the 8th, and it is at the Beaumont Public Library. Judy, what time are we starting?
We're going to start at 10.
We're starting at 10. We are going to talk about the basics of DNA, and then we are going to actually, for the people who've had DNA testing, if they will bring their laptops, we're going to go on to the different testing sites and show them how to effectively work their matches, how to use these results.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So it seems all three of you have gotten a lot of rewards out of joining the DAR. Talk to us a little bit more about what you've found as a reward from participating in the organization. And we can start with Sharon.
When I came to Lexington from southeastern Kentucky, I left a culture where family is so very important. Not only my grandparents, but within miles of my home lived all my great aunts and uncles. I went to a tiny church in which I was related to everyone there. And so, I agree with Hillary Clinton that it takes a village, and that was my village.
Yeah.
Those were the adults, all of them, that loved me and shaped me. And when I came to Lexington, partially it was culture shock, because in a farming community, we don't worry about lawns. That was the first thing I thought when I came to Lexington. I've never seen people so obsessed with grass, But at any rate, I felt a disconnect. And I had found living in a subdivision, I guess I had a concept that we would be a community there, and that wasn't true. People tended to pull into their garage, close the door, and you didn't see them until they came out in their car the next morning. So in DAR, I found a family. I found a community of women who loved me, supported me. They wanted me to be a member. They saw things in me that I did not see in myself. I never imagined myself at 25 as a public speaker. The thought terrified me. After X number of years in DAR, I actually gave a DNA program to 7,000 people on a cruise ship. So
Wow.
I've come a long way. But they were so supportive, and I'm a hearing impaired person. I lost one ear to meningitis when I was 7. And then when I was 40, I actually lost most of the hearing in my other ear due to autoimmune inner ear disease. And I was so upset and so depressed and didn't know how I could function in the world, with almost no functional hearing. And my DAR family just embraced me. They said, "You can do this. You can do this. We'll help you." And I never felt less than. I never felt as if people had given up on me. And so, I think I may have been the first legally deaf executive officer for DAR.
Incredible.
Yeah.
What about you, Robin?
Well, I've made wonderful friends along the way. And Judy's a wonderful regent. She's given me a lot of opportunities to be innovative and do some different things. So I feel like I've gotten some additional leadership experience. And that's, I think, helped me grow.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I've just learned a great deal. The more we study history, like you said, the reading list, I just finished the book, The Civil Wars of Julia Ward Howe, and I didn't know anything about her other than she crafted the poem that became the Battle Hymn of the Republic. So, there's so much more depth. I loved my history classes in school, but you got a couple of paragraphs about a topic and then you moved on. And there's always so much more depth to everything if you can take the time to seek out good resources and just read and enjoy the learning experience. I think it's different when you get to choose what you want to learn as an adult than when you feel like you're being force-fed,
Yeah.
in a classroom.
Yeah. The true definition of lifelong learning.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Judy, now in our previous discussions, you sound like you're really proud of the Lexington chapter because it is one of the oldest in the nation and was initiated right at the beginning of the DAR journey. And one of the first projects, or one of the projects that the Kentucky DAR was responsible for, was a monument at Bryan Station Settlement. Talk to us a little bit more about the history of that and how people can go visit that monument.
Well, that monument was really phenomenal. It was erected within 6 years of the formation of our chapter. It is a significant monument. It is of significant size. It's made of Indiana limestone. The names of all the women who were heroic in saving the Bryant Station fort is carved in that stone, and it sits over a spring. And the significance of that is that there were actually real live flaming arrows that were shot into forts and to try to set them on fire and destroy them. And these ladies walked out of the fort, went to the spring to collect water, knowing that they were surrounded, that there were people hiding in the woods ready to launch
There were
an attack.
Native Americans that were
right, and others
besieged, and
right.
others, and British soldiers,
right.
British Canadian soldiers.
And so they gathered water and brought it back in. And so that monument sits over the spring. So the spring is sort of embedded in the monument. And it's one of the largest and most significant early monuments that is only to honor women's heroism in wartime. And it is on private property. It's owned by a private farm. And it is an active farm. So the public cannot just go visit it, unfortunately. We would love it if that was possible, but as I said, the landowners have a working farm there. But we do try to make opportunities available from time to time, and the landowners have cooperated with us about allowing us to access it for our members to come and visit it so they can see it and so that we can execute repairs on it. We have a special fund funds we've set aside to repair any cracks, fissures, breakage, anything like that happens on the monument.
And I would like to add that all of the women on the monument, if they lived and had descendants, are recognized by DAR as patriots of the American Revolution. And I think we talk about minority patriots a lot, but I think it's also to remember that there were women patriots. My ancestor was one who was captured when Martin's Station fell to the British and Indians, and she was marched on foot to Detroit and then on to Montreal. She kept herself and her children alive, came back to Kentucky, and lived on. And also Mary Hemings, who was the mother of Sally Hemings, is recognized as a Black female patriot because she too was captured by the British when they invaded the Richmond areas. So we want to really keep alive the stories of these women patriots.
Yeah.
They're very important.
It's like a crochet of different stories that you can just listen to.
And I think another thing that is important, remembering their stories, but also how it informs our lives.
Yes.
As I said, my background is very much like Sharon's. I grew up in the Cumberland Gap area. I didn't know it at the time, but my family were pioneer ancestors there. I was born 160 years after my family settled there, 12 miles from where one of their farms was. So very similar to Sharon. The thing that I thought the DAR brought to me is, a friend of mine has an expression, families, everybody has one.
Yeah.
And it kind of expresses the idea that there's a certain amount of dysfunction in everybody's family. And there certainly was in the one I grew up in. And it was hard for me to understand. And I was actually very interested in psychology because I wanted to know more about why people behave in ways that really don't seem to make sense. Once you do your lineage, it really informs how you've inherited more than just brown eyes and brown hair. You have inherited a set of behaviors. Some of those behaviors, like for example, I did not realize the depth of military experience that my family had had, and it was shocking to me that it hadn't been explained. But in every generation, I have family members who went to war, and there's a lot of trauma with that.
Yes.
Serious.
I had an ancestor who was in a Confederate prison camp for the last year of the Civil War. I cannot imagine. I mean, the Confederate Army could not feed itself, much less a Union prisoner. And at the same time, I had a Confederate ancestor in a Union prison camp. That is a lifetime traumatic experience. And it's going to resonate in how people raise and interact with their children and their grandchildren. And your grandfather isn't going to say, guess what? I was in the war and I was traumatized. They tend not to talk about it. And I also think, referring to Sharon's devotion to DNA, the DAR has a set of podcasts that are oral histories of Black women who have decided to join the DAR. They are an unflinching telling of why they wanted to join, the barriers they faced. There's one woman, though, that I found particularly interesting. She descends from Green Clay, who is a very famous Central Kentucky foundational ancestor. And so one of the questions she was asking her oral history is, when did you discover that your family might have descended from this extremely famous and very important foundational figure in Kentucky history? You know what she said? She said, my family has always known. It was just that we knew we couldn't tell white people about it. Well, that brought tears to my eyes because I thought, why is it the responsibility of Black people to be a container for the secrets of white people? It's just not right. And so the fact that she could claim that publicly and that it's acknowledged and celebrated that she's a part of the famous Clay family that produced Cassius Clay, that produced Henry Clay, and produced a bunch of DAR members.
Exactly.
The fact that she can say that and be welcome in the bosom of DAR is extremely important to me.
Yes.
I don't want to be a part of an organization that's not fair. And I want an organization that relies on facts. And if facts are hard to face, so be it. But in the recovery community, they'll tell you you're as sick as your secrets. And we don't need them.
Yeah.
We need to reveal the truth and celebrate it.
And DNA does that.
Yeah.
And it does that with honesty.
Yeah. And this is a great note to end the podcast on, is part of the DAR is to learn about your history in order to address current issues so that they're not perpetuated over and over again. Thank you guys so much for sharing your stories with us and sharing all the information about the Daughters of the American Revolution. I appreciate your time. And for more information, we put your website for the Lexington chapter and for the national organization on the link to this podcast.
Great.
You guys have been listening to our podcast on the Daughters of the American Revolution. Thank you for listening. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Kentucky Room, a podcast brought to you by the Central Library's Kentucky Room staff at the Lexington Public Library. If you enjoyed listening, please take a minute to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you have any questions about local history or genealogy research, you can visit us in the Kentucky Room to use our collection and newspaper microfilm, or you can email us at elibrarian@lexpublib.org. That's elibrarian@lexpublib.org. I'm Mariam, and we'll be back with another trip down Lexington's memory lane.